The number of children accused of crimes in Norfolk has gone up, but should we be worried, and what can be done to help stop youth offending? Good evening. The number of children suspected of committing a crime in Norfolk has almost doubled over the last 5 years. But police say it's happening because of a change in the way offences are recorded and because more people are reporting crimes to them. So what's behind the figures? Neil Perry's been finding out.
New figures released by Norfolk Police to the EDP show juveniles committed 3,808 offences last year. That's almost twice the number in 2012. Then the figure was 2,142. Some of those carrying out the crimes were as young as just 5, according to statistics released under the Freedom of Information Act. More than a third of the offences recorded in 2016 were of violence against the person, and sexual offences quadrupled to 244. But the police say it's because there's been a change in the way crime is recorded, meaning every complaint is logged as a crime, even if no one's prosecuted.
It's actually a systematic change which took place back in 2013 called the National Crime Recording Standards. Some of the Home Office counting rules changed for the police service, which took effect in 2014. Which meant that anybody who came to report a crime to police had a crime details taken for every circumstance. In the past, we had a discretionary ability to put people's details as suspects on crimes. That was taken away from the police service in 2014. So what you find is across all age categories, it's not just impacting on young people, is that there is a rise in the number of recorded crime. We can see that is quite evident from the difference which exists between the British Crime Survey and the National Crime Recording Standards from the police service, that there is a huge difference between reported crime to police and experience of crime. So it's only natural that we'll see an increase when the standards of recording change.
So a change in the way crime is recorded, but what can be done to reduce youth crime here in Norfolk? Here to talk about this is Chris Small, who's the head of the Youth Offending Service at Norfolk County Council, and Dan Mobbs, who's the chief executive of the Mancroft Advice Project. So, Chris Small, is it getting better or worse? It's confusing, it's hard to understand. Can you clear it up for us?
Yeah, I mean, certainly from my position, the situation's got much better, certainly much better. Youth offending teams were formed in 2000. And there's a youth offending team in every local authority area in the country. They're multidisciplinary teams.
What does that mean?
Well, it means that within the team that I manage, there are police officers seconded to us from the constabulary. There are probation officers, teachers, social workers, nurses, as well as staff that are directly employed with specialist functions to work with victims, to work with young people in the community doing unpaid work projects, for instance, substance misuse workers. So there's a range of different specialists within a team, within one room, within one team that's got easy access then to a whole range of skills in terms of working with young people. And as far as I'm concerned, there are less young people in the criminal justice system now than there have been at any point this century. There are less young people entering the criminal justice system for the first time. That's reduced by 44% in the last 2 years in Norfolk. There are less young people in prison than there have been at any time this century. That's reduced nationally from over 3,000 5 years ago to, I think it was 829 last month. That's national figures. So my perception is that the situation is much better than it was, say, at the turn of the century.
Is there then a perception problem about what people think about crime is happening and what's actually happening?
I think what those figures tell me is that we're taking things a lot more seriously, and we can do that because of the successes we've had in Norfolk. And we know that Norfolk's a very low crime area, and that's something to be proud of. But I think what it also tells us that we mustn't be complacent. It's easy to celebrate success, but it's harder to keep that success going. And I think it just keeps us focused, really.
OK, well, we asked Norwich Prison if they wanted to share their thoughts with us on youth crime and figures, and the Ministry of Justice gave us a statement. It says youth offending has fallen sharply over the past decade, as has the number of children and young people in custody, but we must do more. A new youth custody service and a new specialist role are being created to allow frontline staff to focus on tackling the factors that contribute to youth offending, protecting victims and building better lives. So a new youth custody service, do you welcome that? Do you think that's what we need in the system?
I do welcome that. That's a very new announcement, and we don't really have the detail of what that new youth custody service is going to look like. But it will be the first time that there's been a very specific focus on youth custody within the Ministry of Justice. And I'm hopeful that will make some changes. There's been some well publicised adverse publicity really within the youth justice system over the last 12 months. The nearest, it's interesting you said you were talking to Norwich Prison. Of course, Norwich Prison doesn't have young people in it. The youngest people in Norwich are 18. The nearest prison to Norfolk for young people is in North Kent. So that
must be incredibly difficult for them and their families.
Oh, almost impossible for their families to visit them on a regular basis. And also, that takes young people from Norfolk will be in a prison in North Kent, mixing with young people often from the kind of metropolis that is London, really, with a whole range of different experiences and circumstances that they've never come across before. They're certainly out of their comfort zone in terms of the situation that they're in.
And also,
go ahead.
That's when things have really gone wrong, isn't it? I mean, that's what we want to avoid at all costs. And for me, the emphasis needs to be on the earlier intervention. What can we do to prevent young people ending up in that situation? But the other thing in these figures is that we need to give young people some credit for making some really good choices. It's not just crime that's been going down, it's drug use, for example, amongst young people has been going down. And often we look to us as, was it our government initiative that led to that success? Well, actually, it's young people making some really good choices.
Okay, well, why do some young people fall into crime? We spoke to Lorne Green, he's the Police and Crime Commissioner for Norfolk. He thinks that one issue is boredom.
Sometimes with rather small intervention we can make a big difference. I spent Saturday in Thetford, for instance. They had a concern in Thetford historically about graffiti. I offered to build for them, I didn't do personally, to build a graffiti wall, and I was there for the launch of this on Saturday. They've done a wonderful job of young people, 20 young people from all sorts and conditions of background to improve an underpass. It's now a beauty spot in Thetford. That's one sort of modest intervention that can make a big difference, young people doing something for the community. I think a lot of young people are bored. They really need some stimulation, and if we can tap into their enthusiasm, their creativity, we can make a big difference.
Lorne Green there. Do you agree, is boredom a factor? Or is that unfairly tarring young people with a bad name?
I'm not sure it's either unfairly tarring, nor do I think it's really a significant factor. From my perspective, the age of the young people we're talking about is a period of adolescence in which we change from being a young person through puberty and come out the other end, in my case as a man. And there's a massive amount of change taking place that we're trying to deal with within one system, and young people rub up against authority in a whole range of different ways. For some of those, it's about their behaviour that brings them up against the police in terms of where they're first conflicting with society in some way. As Dan's already referenced, there's a whole range of other areas that young people might have some difficulties with the police.
And Daniel, your whole role is about helping young people get into adulthood successfully. Do you think that boredom is an issue in terms of crime, or are there lots of other complex factors we need to consider?
There's lots of factors, and there needs to be opportunities for young people to let off steam, as Chris was saying. You're going through great changes, you've got energies, and also it's an important part of growing up is taking risks, and you want those risks to be safer risks. You don't want them to be risk-taking that involves crime or drugs or things that could be very dangerous. So I think it is up to us and organisations like MAP to create opportunities for that, whether that's through discussion, whether that's through therapeutic work, whether that's through activities that stretch someone physically. It's really important that young people are getting the chance to try new things out. And so I wouldn't say it's entirely just about boredom. You hear that. I don't think young people commit crime just because they're bored. There's definitely other factors in play.
Okay, well, some academics have criticised the new way of recording every complaint as a crime, saying it criminalises young people who are sometimes not fully aware of the consequences of their behaviour. Chief Inspector Lou Provart from Norfolk Police says it's something they are very careful about.
It is never our intention as the police service to criminalise young people, because it has devastating consequences for their long-term prosperity. So having a criminal record stays with somebody for a long period of time. So we have now got programmes with the youth offending team to look at issues around understanding the numbers of people coming into custody who are what's called first-time entrants into the custody system. And what we can say from that data is over the course of the last 4 years, there's been a 44% reduction in the number of young people actually coming through the custody system as first-time entrants.
So issues there. Dan, do you think that young people you work with really understand the consequences of the things that they're doing, perhaps?
I think factually young people can, and that's a range of things. So, for example, young people taking risks with sexual health or drugs know the consequences on it. But I think it's more complicated about why young people make the decisions that they make, and we need to understand that a lot more in terms of risk taking that we'd consider unwise. And it's to do with issues of self-esteem, family background, not feeling able to have opportunities to try things out. And so, unfortunately, things are always more complicated.
Are there problems that, elsewhere in the system? So perhaps with education in schools or with social care, are there other problems that we need to look at?
Well, I mean, I think Dan makes a really good point about risk-taking behaviour, and we would want our young people to begin to take risks and push the boundaries and find out where those boundaries are. And quite often, you don't know how far you can go until you've got there or somebody tells you to stop in a way. And I think we should be encouraging that within young people. Now, Dan's in a good place, I think, to talk about some of the problems within schools, because you do quite a lot of work in schools with that.
Yeah. So I think schools can spot some of the challenging behaviours young people make early on, and actually know that they need some additional support to channel some of those energies, and the schools need to put on those kind of programmes. We'll talk
more about prevention after the break. Just quickly, you've been getting in touch on social media as always. Jonathan Child says, if you watch the CCTV around McDonald's in Great Yarmouth, that will be a big insight into these issues. JJOP in Heatherset says, we have a horrible bench speaker which earlier this year they found illegal legal highs, and I suppose this is the public perception of it, isn't it? People get frustrated because they see things in their communities that worry them. They
do, but I think it's very important to say that young people hanging out in groups is fine, and we've all done it, and actually, they haven't used it locally, but that's a measure of antisocial behaviour. Just young people hang out. So we have to be careful and not just to label young people in groups as a problem. It can be good that's socialising. It's just when they're being exposed to other risks that we have to be careful of.
Okay, well, we'll talk more about solutions in a moment. Do stay with us after the break. We'll be talking more about youth crime in Norfolk and what can be done to tackle it.
Yep.
Welcome back. Tonight we're talking about youth crime and what can be done to reduce it in Norfolk. On the panel this evening, Chris Small from the Youth Offending Team and Dan Mobbs from the Mancroft Advice Project. So what can be done to keep young people away from crime? Let's hear again from the Police and Crime Commissioner, Lorne Green, who is supporting the work of the Youth Offending Team.
My office has put in £114,000 of your taxpayers' money into this effort to try and combat reoffending. They've done wonderful work, including restorative justice. I've seen young people who are actually now working in workshops to try and do things for old people's homes and so on, as a kind of repayment to the community that they may have done harm to in the past.
So that's your team he's talking about. What's this restorative justice? How does it work?
Yes, so Lorne's just there talking about the Restorative Justice Project, and he's referencing some of our reparation work. So one of the things we do under restorative justice, for instance, is unpaid work in the community for the good of community. That there's a whole range of different projects. We're always looking for new projects across the county. Many of those that we get come from parish councils and local communities.
So what sort of thing could they be doing?
Well, tree planting. We do tree planting in the new woodlands, litter picking. We grow fruit and vegetables in allotments and then donate those to local good causes. We've put up signs in certainly in Sheringham. A lot of the drink banning order signs were put up by young people.
Does it frustrate you though if people say, "Oh, well, that's just a soft option"? We're treating them too softly.
It doesn't frustrate me particularly, but I don't think that's an accurate reflection of young people having to restrict their liberty effectively. They're giving up their time to do things for other people, to do things on behalf of the community as a whole. More broadly, restorative justice really is about trying to repair the harm within communities and between individuals. So,
do you think it works as a preventative as well, that it stops them doing it again?
I think it works really well as a preventative and enables people to understand the situation from somebody else's perspective. We shouldn't really forget that the victims of most youth crime are other young people.
Yeah.
Often when we talk about youth crime, we think about older people in communities been the victims, or business has been the victims, but most youth crime is committed against other young people. Most young people are victims of crime before they become offenders themselves.
And Dan, do you think there's a misunderstanding between that older generation and the younger generation?
Yeah.
Do you think old people fear gangs of kids hanging around?
I think they can do, and we've certainly done intergenerational projects. And when I mean that, I mean older people and the younger people kind of missing out that parental generation. And those projects, we come up with activities where the different ages are interacting, and the older people say, actually, we have felt a bit intimidated by a group of young people, and we don't really know why. And in one of these projects, the older people were saying, actually, they're hanging out in the same bus stop that we hung out in when we were young. So there's almost this perception that we also need to overcome, as well as finding preventative solutions, that actually groups of young people aren't necessarily a problem. Like, young people have lots of positive things to offer communities, not just because they've got into trouble either, just because young people have that energy to give something to their community anyway.
And are you still getting the funding you need for those sorts of projects? Because we know that money is so tight, particularly at the county council.
Yeah, funding is under pressure, and what we mustn't do is disinvest from some of that preventative work, because we know really early on in a young person's life if they're at risk of making those bad decisions and into crime. You see that really early on, and one of the biggest predictors is if a young person is excluded from school, and we know in Norfolk school exclusion is quite high. In fact, you're actually 7 times more likely to end up in prison if you've been excluded from school. So from our point of view, we need to invest in some of that preventative work. So whether that's therapeutic work in schools with young people who find it difficult to manage their anger, whether it's giving people mentoring and activities to let off some of that steam, so that they can be there to exist in the classroom and to achieve what they need to achieve
positively. Well, communities, as we've said, often complain that young people cause trouble when hanging around in town. So does there need to be a more joined up approach to give teenagers something to do? We asked Chief Inspector Lou Provart.
Part of our function as the police is working in local neighbourhoods, in local districts and parishes, with local councils at the parish level and at the district council level, to make sure that there is an offer to young people to divert them away from destructive behaviour to more meaningful behaviour. Certainly an example, when I was in Wymondham as the local policing inspector, looking at issues around a skate park, looking at issues around a graffiti wall, looking at issues around making sure that there's an offer so that young people don't congregate in areas which cause levels of concern around antisocial behaviour and crime. So as long as there is an offer, I think actually it's important to have children have a diversionary opportunity to expel some energy.
So Chris, do you think we need a more joined up approach with parish councils, town councils, everybody getting together to give young people those opportunities to do things?
I think we need to recognise that young people are part of our community and they're the future of our community, and ultimately it's to the benefit of and the responsibility of that community to deal with the needs and meet the needs of its young people. They are the community.
It sounds like prevention is key. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, because the cost and consequence to the victims of the crime, to the young person's future life, the cost of the criminal justice system is huge, and it's worth our investment. And no, I completely agree that there needs to be opportunities for young people, but it's really important that when we're developing those programs that we involve young people in what goes on. And at MAC, we don't just offer young people some opportunities. We start by getting young people together and saying, what is it that you think you need? And not only that, is when we're delivering it, that young people are part of that planning and delivery, because then you're getting it right. I mean, young people have got some fantastic ideas, and if we plug into that energy, then we can put them on a positive path. So it's not so much about diverting them from crime, which sounds like crime could happen at any minute. It's more about creating really positive communities for young people to grow up in.
And we need to put the whole thing in context, really. We need to know or recognise that Norfolk is one of the safest, if not the safest county in England to live. There's less crime in Norfolk than in many, many other places. Somebody was just talking earlier on one of the VTs about numbers of young people in custody. Last year there were 16 young people from Norfolk went to custody, just 16. So it's not a huge significant problem.
Do you tend to see the same people over and over again? Is that a problem?
There are, of course, there are a core of young people that we will see more than once, and who will offend more than once. But reoffending rates in Norfolk are going down as well. There are less young people reoffending now than there have been at any time as well. So there are a core of young people who are more involved in crime than others. But the majority of young people probably get involved once, get some input and intervention, and then don't get involved in crime again.
How do you get through and deal with those people, those tricky people who maybe have other wider problems again that keep sort of leading them back into that cycle?
But the whole point of having a multidisciplinary youth offender team, as I said a little while ago, and with a whole range of different professions, is that we can not just look at young people's offending behaviour, but look at young people in the whole. So whenever a young person comes to us for the first time, we meet with that young person, talk to that young person, talk to their parents, talk to other agencies, agencies like MAP that might already have been involved with them, try and establish what their needs are, conduct what we call an assessment to establish what their needs are, and then work with that young person and their family to put in place a plan that's going to meet those needs. Often we do that alongside what's known as youth offender panels. So those are members of the local community who are recruited by us as volunteers, and then they meet with young people, hear a report from our staff about the assessment, and then agree with that young person and their family exactly what the programme's going to be that the young person's going to undertake to try and keep them out of crime in the future. And that's taken the point that Dan made earlier, which is around talking to young people about what they think is going to make the biggest difference.
And everyone benefits from that. I know you mentioned, Zach is being soft on crime. I mean, we're all trying to do what works. I mean, we're all living in Norfolk, really caring about the community, want it to be the safest place it can possibly be. The only note of caution I've got is on, do we have enough preventative services? And you know, we talked about budget pressures earlier. And I think what we need to keep our eye on is that because we've been so successful in Norfolk, that we don't go backwards. And if we remove some of that preventative work, we must keep investing in that preventative work.
And one of the areas that is a cause for concern, of course, isn't it, is sexual offences, things like sexting, having images of another child on a child's phone. Do you think maybe education needs to be improved about that?
Absolutely, and the curriculum in schools on that's quite narrow. And actually, you know, teachers aren't experts in dealing with some of that. They do need help from external organisations, you know, such as us. And it's incredible how these things have changed over time, and we really need to understand that some of the, you know, the crime that's happening now isn't something that we've seen, you know, in history. But absolutely, we need to focus on that.
There's misunderstandings, aren't there? Things around that about when it's okay and when it's not okay. How old you can be.
There's a really interesting storyline on EastEnders at the moment, isn't there? Which is entirely about sexting and how the law can be broken and young people can become involved in a criminal act.
And does that kind of drama help, do you think?
Absolutely.
I think something like EastEnders covering those kind of social areas helps enormously, because it brings to the attention of a wide population the kind of issues of the time.
I think it needs to be kept in the reality of young people's lives, because some of the education is about the extreme events that are much less common. This is far more often between peers, and bullying is and violence is, as Chris was saying. It's even people who are involved in crime are often victims of crime, or much more likely to be victims of crime. And it's the same with the modern offences. You know, you talk about sexting. It's between peers, and so it's easier to think, oh, this is okay. And when there's more education about things.
About all of those things.
About all of those things.
All right, thank you very much. But that is all we've got time for this evening. Thank you to my guests for taking part and to you for watching. If you want to send us your thoughts, you can find us on the Mustard TV Facebook page. We're on Twitter at Mustard This Week, and you can now watch the show again on the Mustard TV YouTube page. Good night.